Yeah, I'll explain.
Yeah. That's it. Tell it to the mic.
Tell it to the mic. Mic drop.
Today's episode of the podcast marks the fifth and final part of my very special Lost Episode series. We really go out in style as today's episode features a virtual tour of Blackbook Winery as it stood at the start of 2018. At that moment in time, founder Sergio Verillo was coming off the back of his first vintage at Blackbook, the 2017 vintage. He leads us by the hand, barrel to barrel, of course sampling each of the wines, but also going into an incredible amount of technical detail about where he sourced the fruit from and the decisions that he made as a winemaker. As you can tell, Sergio is an absolutely natural teacher and does a great job of communicating the decisions he made and the overall philosophy behind the winery. I would say that this episode, above any others in over the last year, are particularly insightful for any aspiring winemakers out there. And if you know of anybody who's thinking of getting into winemaking, I can highly recommend this episode to them. Being as they are under a railway arch in Battersea, you'll notice some atmospheric trains passing overhead, and also the odd beeping warehouse truck, which I've left in so that you can get the full Blackbook experience. Enjoy.
So we're Blackbook Winery. Our USP here is to focus on English grapes. So we are 100% English through and through. We work with two main growers. We get a Pinot Noir and Chardonnay from sort of East Anglia, Essex way. And then we get some Sauvignon Blanc from Oxfordshire. Both growers are family owned. They don't necessarily provide fruit to a lot of people. They're quite selective, as we are. So, I mean, I'm sure with most growers who you speak to, it's all about what they do in the vineyards. And it's no different here. And in fact, it's always of more importance here because of the variable climate and the inconsistent vintages. So their hard work, we reap the rewards of their hard work, basically. So why don't we start with our Sauvignon Blanc from Oxfordshire. This is grown by a guy named Ed. He has... can you just open the tab?
Yeah, sure. With pleasure.
Yeah, it's always a good scent. Glug, 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 glug. Thank you. He was working for a vineyard consultant in the UK, has worked all around, so the southeast, and he decided to plant probably about 3 years ago, of which, he planted some Sauvignon, he planted a little bit of Pinot, which we'll get off from this year, some Bacchus and other sort of typical varieties. So this is actually his first harvest of it, which it came in. The flavor profile coming in was really good. If you don't know about Sauvignon is a hybrid variety. It's Sareb is a Geisenheim clone, basically. I just more or less look at it as a Riesling Muscat blend. If anyone of your listeners wants to look it up and correct me, you feel free. But my interpretation of this is that basically it's a Riesling Muscat blend, of which you have some aromatic profiles on it, not dissimilar to sort of elderflower, citrus notes, waxy lemon, particularly. The way we vinified this is we vinified in two different ways. We basically did one press load. It's all whole bunch press as well, whole cluster. Straight to press. We hand sort in the vineyards. I was part of it. I went there and helped pick. As I do with most of my growers, I go there on the day and I look at what they're doing and how we're doing it, if I can. So this is whole bunch press. We did a press cycle that is very gentle. It's called a Crémant method, so it's particularly meant for sparkling wine. So it's long, soft, sort of gentle pressing. We have a pneumatic press, which means it's a horizontal press with a bladder inside that is used to inflate with compressed air that goes against grates and then through drain channels. So we did the one way, and that went straight to tank. And then we did a normal press cycle, which is a white wine press cycle, and it was a little bit harder, a little bit quicker, it's a little more aggressive. You got a higher amount of solubles, and that went straight to barrel. So I think as we'll go along, you'll find that the wines, I hope you find that the wines have a bit of texture behind them, a bit of depth. That's the style of wine I like. I like texture wines. I like wines that have a beginning, middle, and end. And I like wines that are just, smashable and accessible. And so with the Seyvel, I'd never made Seyvel before. And we wanted to, at the time, I didn't really know what I was going to do with it, to be absolutely frank. It was kind of a last minute opportunity, and I was short on fruit, and I went, all right, yep, dope, I'll get it. And we brought it in, and that's what happened with it. And in the end, we felt it'd be better to put this into sparkling, as with most UK growers. What we also did, we did a little bit of skin contact Chardonnay, about 400 kilos separately, to be put in with our barrel fermented Chardonnay. So we put about sort of 5 to 6% just to fill out that mid palate. And I think the result is going to be a really lovely textured sparkling wine that has longevity and has a really pretty sort of aromatic profile to it.
Drinking well already.
Yeah, I mean, part of this is that, it's been in tank for, I don't know, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and we'll bottle this in the next month, sometimes early April, with the assumption that we'll release it around October. It's not meant to be really a serious wine at all, but it's meant to be interesting and fun, ultimately.
I mean, I would say it's difficult, obviously, to judge it before it's got the bubbles going in there. But yeah, I just said before, it's drinking very well, very accessible. The one word I would use here is fresh. It just feels so fresh. It reminds me of almost like a freshly squeezed juice, when you have that kind of acidity and that vivacity. I love that word. When you're actually taking it in.
I mean, freshness, I think, is a key descriptor of English wine without a doubt. We don't have issues with acidity here, by all means. I think it's worth knowing that all my wines go through secondary malolactic fermentation. So I don't add bacteria to it. I think that's through secondary, it's a little bit easier, a little more controlled. But yeah, this actually I inoculated because, again, I didn't really want to take much risk with it. Not that I'm risk adverse, but having never made it before, not really knowing the variety, it was a calculated risk that I kind of went. So we used 2 different types of yeast with it, both Saccharomyces cerevisiae. One is sort of a high quality Chardonnay strain that's isolated in Burgundy. It's referred to as a sort of it's a Chardonnay premium isolated yeast, and then we used a sort of a more aromatic yeast that's primarily used for rosés in the tank version of this, and I think the combination of both really lends itself to savory and sort of these fruit notes, and sort of preserves a bit the aromatic profiles that ideally I'm looking for. Right. Well, let's move over to the Chardonnay. I think that's the logical next step. Okay. As I mentioned, we have a grower in sort of the East Anglia area, particularly Essex. Third generation farmer. 2006, he looked to diversify his crops. He obviously saw the popularity and rise in demand, and decided to do that, to plant. So, but what is interesting about him, and what is actually I find to be really great, is the fact that he didn't plant Champenois clones. He didn't plant sparkling clones. He planted Burgundian clones. And what that means is that you don't get the same issues in ripening, for him, the reason he planted it, as he describes, is the fact that it gives him flexibility in what he wants to do. So he could very well use it for sparkling, because as I said earlier, we don't have issues with acidity in the UK. So that's not a problem. And in good years, you can make a really great still wine. And for us, 2017, and for him, it was a super early harvest. I mean, you're talking about like 3 weeks early. But the quality was good. And for him, my relationship with this grower is one of which where he doesn't really mind which clones I get. So I hand select the clones. I do clonal selection, which is huge. It's, as I said earlier, if the different clones have different ripening times, they have different characteristics, which ultimately all give character to your final products. And for me, with Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, in this climate, Burgundy clones allow it for better ripening and better phenolic ripeness as well. Where for ultimately, sugars and acids are going to go. You'll get to a point where it'll be fine. But the primary issue is phenolic ripeness, which is the flavor profile of the grape itself. So I do vineyard walks. I go to up until a month or two before, a month or two before harvest or estimated harvest dates. I'll go do a walkthrough. I'll do sampling. I'll taste it up until a couple of days beforehand if I can. All the vineyards are within sort of 2 hours of us, which is really important for myself. And with that, let's try it. So these all went through. Yeah. So what we're tasting the 2017 Chardonnay. They were basically how we process this is not dissimilar from the Seyval. So we sort in the vineyards via hand picking. These were brought in sort of in these half-ton bins, and then it's dumped into our press, whole bunch, and run on a sort of fairly gentle cycle. And it's not done reductively. I don't believe necessarily Chardonnay needs to be pressed reductively or processed reductively. In fact, if you hyperoxidize Chardonnay, you tend to get more stability in your wine, and there's been a bunch of sort of research supporting that, so you get color stability and ultimately overall wine stability. So I don't add sulfur at pressing time. In fact, none of this has had any sulfur, which not necessarily because I'm adverse to sulfur, but because they're clean fruit. And as long as I keep my barrels topped up, there's been no sign of any sort of microbial spoilage. All the barrels were treated, washed out, sulfured. I bought them from. Funny story about the barrels. I drove to. So I worked in Burgundy in 2014, and I was trying to track down these old barrels, and finally tracks them down to this really lovely sort of very typical Burgundian producer called Sylvain Dussault in Meursault. And I had this 13 square meter van, like a massive transit van that I drove over, and I literally he sold me 15 barrels, and on top of that I had purchased also 2 500 liter barrels. I tend to like larger barrels. And he was convinced that they wouldn't fit in, and very French. He didn't speak any English. And he's like, no. I was like, it will totally fit. I promise you this. And me and his worker were jamming things in, but the result ended up being we fit 17 barrels in a 13 square meter van. And I drove back from Burgundy to London. Anyway, we digress. You can, if you choose to edit that out, that's your choice. Oh damn. So we back to the winemaking. So basically, we end up we press in, and we have a 20 hectare press that holds about 1.2 tons whole cluster, and maybe about 2.1 tons. You can squeeze in there destemmed. We do have destemmer, which we used a bit. I'll show you that later. So it goes into the press tray. Straight from the press tray, it goes into the barrels. with the barrels, we decided to do a slightly conscious decision of seeing what would happen with different amounts of solubles in them. So, I mean, your listeners can't see this, but, going from left to right, we have a low soluble wine, so i.e. not a high amount of grape matter going in there, or grape matter. And then the second one is about medium, then we have a heavier one in the end. And just to kind of mix it up and see how much texture we can get and to find a balance. Because again, my English wine experience there's not, I do have a bit. I've worked in a number of different places around the UK. But it's not, I wouldn't say I'm extensive or at all sort of, an expert on it, But that being said, I've focused my career on cold climate Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. And as such, I've made it all over the world. So, with this in mind, all of it went through indigenous ferments, so spontaneous fermentation, followed by spontaneous malolactic fermentation. We do a bit of lees stirring on it, once or twice a week, on all of them. And for me, the end result, you get a bit of texture on the palate, a bit of biscuit notes on the nose. There's a bit of evolution on there. And you get that quintessential zestiness from English wines. But I hope to think that there is a bit more to it than the zestiness on the palate. So again, following the theme of how I make wines and what wines I enjoy, it's all about texture. It's all about finding how to maneuver that within the confines of what you're working with. I'm a fan of experimentation, and I've certainly made experimental wine in other places. However, I think ultimately I'm not an experimental winemaker on the whole. I mean, very much follow traditional methods. But, with like anything else in life, you find different ways of doing things that you end up acquiring this really lovely toolbox of different ways and different things that you can then pull out as and when you need them to make the best possible wine possible, the best possible wine you can. And for me, that's our aim here. We want to make the best possible wine we can. We want to be, we want to change people's perception of English wine. We are going to be primarily still. So, on the nose here, you get a little bit of reduction. So sort of that flintiness, which I really like. Some people see it as a fault. I see it as complexity. It's a very, very, very Burgundian thing to say. Having worked in New World and Old World, New World, there are very few producers, at least historically, that have smelled wines and gone, yes, I'd like a little bit of reduction, please. Where it gives you that sort of like gunflinty, gunpowder-esque. Whereas in sort of other Old World places like, it's the terroir. But for me, it's a conscious decision to let go a little bit reductive, and not to prevent that, because that's what I like.
Well, I've got to admit, I didn't know that we grew Chardonnay in England, so that's a first for me, and to now actually taste this is lovely. The color is not what I expect from Chardonnay. It's a much lighter, it's a much clearer. But what I would say is that I'm definitely recognizing this as Chardonnay, but with again a wicked acidity running through there. But interesting, you talking about the style and getting the texture out there. Definitely getting great texture here as well, and it's a real mouth filler at the same time as being very acidic. Lovely.
And that's that's having gone through a secondary fermentation to reduce acidity, and that's why you need the texture. That's why you need the viscosity in the wine. And that's why if you kind of look at other areas of the world, cool climates, Rieslings, for instance, not only German but also Alsatian or New World ones as well, sort of in New Zealand, Australia, they use sugar as a balancer to offset that high acidity. And there's a reason why they do that. It ultimately gives you a balance and a perception of a lower acidity in your wine. So using that technique, it's not a new technique at all. And mind you, these are completely dry, and there's no residual sugar whatsoever in them. But using that technique in a different way, so using lees stirring as a means of supporting that, and using old wood to get the oxygen in there to soften the wines. And so again, you go back to what every winemaker goes and does stages, like a chef or a sommelier. You end up going and doing 3-month placements at these places, and you pick these up. And for me, from the outset, I wanted to focus on high quality stuff. So hopefully that reflects in what I'm trying to achieve. The Chardonnay that we just tried came out of 228-liter Burgundy barrels, between sort of 5 and 10 years old. That's generally my preference and use. However, as I mentioned, I picked up 2 500-liter barrels from cooperage in Beaujolais. That was recommended by a buddy of mine in Beaune who uses them in his wines. He makes pretty stellar stuff. So obviously, you trust the locals, right? Who I haven't used with. So I went down to the cooperage on his recommendation and picked up 2 500-liter barrels that I was intending to use, but only ended up using one in the Chardonnay. And actually, I wasn't really intending to use any new oak at all, but this was a nice surprise. I think it's ultimately we're going to do. I think I'd be somewhere at 30% new oak. But I mean that's not. No, I say 30%, but yeah, and that if I put all of it together, it'll be about 30%. I may end up siphoning half it off and saving it for reserve wine for next year. Which will bring it down to about 20% new oak. But I have yet to make a decision. We'll be racking this up in May, bottling in July, and release in September. So there's a little more time to with them. I'm trying to. I mean, if I had it my way, I'd leave these wines till next year. I think the Chardonnay has real legs, and will just get better. The longer it ages. I think at the moment this is probably my favorite, but going back to the new barrel, it lends itself to enhancement of the fruit characters in the wine. The way this barrel is made is that there's no direct flames to the wood, so there's no charring, so you don't get toasty notes from it. You just get the sort of fruit-driven compounds from the woods. You get a bit of tannin structure from it, so it's effectively put over an open flame for about 55-60 minutes with a heat temperature of no more than 50 degrees. So it's sort of long, gentle extraction of the toasting. So you don't get all that sort of biscuity, toasty, stronger tannin extraction from when other barrel producers that tend to have direct flames on it. And again, this goes along with a gentle extraction with all the wines. English fruit is super delicate. If you try English wines, and I seriously encourage you to do so, because there's some great things coming out. But it doesn't handle new oak terribly well, at least not a high proportion. And I was quite skeptical when I got this barrel about the same, but I think we'll try the blend in a minute. What this does is that it adds a richness to not only the nose, but it complements the fruit really well. And it doesn't overpower it, that you don't get these super coconut sweet spices that you get from potentially some American oak. And it just, again, it's all about layering. If you think about how winemakers produce their products, it's not dissimilar to musicians in a lot of ways, or artists. I mean, as pretentious as it sounds, I'm not intending that to sound pretentious at all. In fact, it's just as an example of trying to understand the process a bit more. So I mean, you don't really get that inherent oak taste on the wine. I think certainly on the palate. Certainly on the nose, but I think that it's it's quite subtle.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I would say, for me, the oak was more prevalent right when you first got it out there. But yeah, it really softened up, and wow, that seems like it's got, quite a bit of aging potential. And yeah, I'd be really interested to see how that one evolves and where that goes.
So this is, I should also just mention that everything stayed on Scourse lees from October. I haven't moved anything out because again, it just adds texture. Also, it doubles up as giving nutrients naturally to the yeast and to the lactobacillus bacteria. So yeah, so now we're basically tasting a blend of all the Chardonnay, including the 500 liter new barrel, and ultimately I think, as I said earlier, it wasn't my intention to do 30% new oak. However, I think it handles it well. You do get a bit of that sort of new oak on the nose, but I think on the palate it adds texture and depth and a bit more lift to the wine.
And I don't know if I missed it, but if you haven't already said it, could you just say something about like what that experiment means, I guess, in terms of the evolution of like your recipe?
Which experiment?
So, the blending that you've just done there.
Oh, right. So yeah, so Lawrence, you're asking me about the blending and how that impacts our style and ultimately, I mean, for us, blending is, so we vinify everything separately. That's quite important. I mean, we didn't have loads of fruit. We probably produced about 6,000 bottles last year across the board. The Chardonnay alone, I think we'll have about 1,900 bottles, 1,800 bottles, something like that. And it all came from a single vineyard. So there's not much, complication regarding it. But the blending for me with a Chardonnay is to understand ultimately what direction we're going, what is working. So, for instance, if I didn't feel as though the 30% new oak was working, I wouldn't use all of it. I mean, we are a small outfit. We are self-funded. So obviously, I'm sure this is with all. I say we, it's my wife and I. So it's my wife and I, and she has the passion as much as I do. But ultimately, those decisions, stylistic decisions, are made from the start, and then through blending, you kind of hone in and focus your style. Ultimately, to get a better understanding of how the wine's going to look as a finished product, because you do these blending trials, effectively what they're called, and then that is done right before you take the wine from barrel into tank, and that's the last step before bottling, ultimately, unless you want to filter your wines. And for us, it's quite important because, as I said, it's our first vintage. We're still trying to find our footing a bit, and it's ultimately, I think, like any good winery, your style will evolve and it'll find its own legs in due course, and we're just trying to get there. So blendings is just a tool that a lot of winemakers use to understand what's going to go where. So ultimately, to make a long story short, is that winemakers use it to sometimes separate the best plots, find out which barrels are tasting the best, and do barrel selections, was referred to, and which ones are not. Sometimes they find that, blending, I don't know, Albariño with Pinot Blanc and Godello work really well. And so that's what they try to strive. And it's also trying to understand your identity, ultimately. But yeah, that's for us. It's just a matter of working with what we have and finding out how we can best represent the UK and English quality wine. That's really important. That's really important to me, and that's really important to, I think, for consumers to understand, is that we are, and mind you, I'm American, so I'm not of this origin of this country, but I've fallen in love with the challenges of cold climate, and everyone's doing sparkling. I think there's real potential in English wine, and therefore my tension's over about blending. So we've had the Seyval Blanc, that's our bubbles. We've done our barrel fermented Chardonnay. We've tasted the individual barrels, single barrel. Now we're on to our Pinot Noir Rosé, Essex grown. These are again Burgundy clones, same vineyard as the Chardonnay. These are 777-115 clones, which I really like. I've worked with them a number of places and really, really like it. I think they make stellar wines. The 115 in particular has smaller bunches, higher concentration, better skin, color extraction, better flavor profile. So these came in, again, first week of October, like the Chardonnay. They came within a day of each other. And then we chucked it whole cluster into the press, and we let it sit overnight. I added a little bit of sulfur because I didn't want anything to ferment, because at that point in time it was actually a bit warm. The beauty about the railway arches is that it doesn't get lower than 5 degrees in here. It doesn't get higher than 20 degrees. So it's actually pretty, and the humidity stays around sort of 85 to 95, which is pretty stellar. So we left the grapes in the press overnight. Came in sort of late following morning, pressed it straight to barrel. So the rosé is barrel fermented, and then I racked up probably within just at the end of fermentation. I let finish fermentation in tank, but I left 1 barrel. So and I left it there to age. So basically, call it 5 barrels. So 20% was in barrel. 80% was left in tank. On Gros Lees again, went through malolactic fermentation naturally, indigenous fermentation, and this is a really interesting one because it's the rosé's kind of gone through like hoofs and troughs, depending upon the day and depending upon it's really been a fickle one. Some days it tastes fantastic. I'm like, oh, this is gonna be really good. Other days I'm like, this is gonna be shit. But I think now that it's been racked off, it's getting a little bit less disjointed. I sulfured it at the same time, just to kind of brighten it up a bit. It's pretty 25 parts per million. I mean, if your listeners know, it's not a lot. I mean, most people put between 50 and 60 parts per million, and they'll get another. Yeah, it's literally a pinch just to kind of make sure it's going to be okay. And with this is going to be released at the end of May, early June, and we'll have about 1,000 bottles of it. But I think it's going to be good. You got a mixture of this a little bit of that volatility that brings lift to the wine itself. Gives it a bit of strawberry cream essence. You get some confected notes too. But yeah.
Sorry, just like a sentence literally, but confected notes?
Confected notes. Bubblegum. I mean, think of like Beaujolais Nouveau, or like a Fleury, for instance. A lot of wines that are basically made in that style end up having these like bubblegum notes, but sort of some almost like candy notes. Yeah. So I mean, that confected's I like confected. It's a pretty broad term, but it describes wine pretty accurately at the time. And again, this follows a theme through all the wines. It's recurring. It's not as, in terms of texture. I even did a bit of leaf stirring on the rosé. I was like, well, why not? Let's see what happens. But again, I did it. I like the end result of it. And again, you have a start, a middle, and a finish. It's quite fluid. I find. But again, I also think right now it's a bit disjointed because it was just racked, and I think it needs probably another month and a half in tank to kind of tighten up and be a little bit more together. But yeah, we'll see what happens with it. But I've high hopes for the summertime for this wine.
I'll just say this is coming together really very well in my mouth right now. Just a little bit of warmth, and I love rosé. I love fresh. I love all the styles of rosés that there are out there. And yeah, I can imagine this is pretty chilly coming out the tank now, and I can just imagine this on a nice summer's day. Hopefully we get a summer this year. But yeah, this is really drinking really nice. And actually, I did just want to double check the color of this now. Is that going to change much until the final product?
No, I mean that sort of pale Provence style hue, it won't change ultimately that much. I mean, it has gone a little bit lighter from the sulfur. That wasn't necessarily intentional, but again, it is one of those things where it's a cool climate and you don't want to extract too much because then you get a green sort of profile to the wine. And so ultimately, yeah, the color itself, I think, my background is as a sommelier in sort of the Michelin star world for when I first came to London, and then I moved to winemaking. So, but my perception of consumer understanding of rosé is that I tend to like light, fresh styles, and Provence always comes to mind. It's not like I'm trying to replicate that style. It just happens to be what the coloration came out to be. But yeah, there shouldn't be too much deviation from that. But it's good fortune that it's come out the way it has. again, being barrel fermented, it was a little bit darker as well before I racked it. So that's the benefit of sulfur. Sulfur, it's a antimicrobial, antibacterial preserver that you add to wine so it doesn't get messed up in the long run. Some wines you can get away with for sure, absolutely, and. But I'm always a fan of adding just a little bit. This is basically
okay.
Right. So we have the smallest production size. Really, the rosé was an accident. Logistically, it was a bit of a nightmare. My tanks arrived after my fruit, so I ultimately what ended up happening is I wasn't really planning making a rosé. I was planning just making a still red Pinot, but I'm glad I made the rosé. I think it came out good, as I mentioned. It came out well, and I have 3 barrels. End up with 3 barrels of Pinot Noir still that were fermented in open top 228 barrels, 4 of them, of which we processed it 25% whole cluster, followed by some distemming on top of it. So. Overall, it's maybe just shy of a ton of fruit that we had of the Pinot still. It fermented over the course of a couple of weeks. Basically, indigenous fermentation, again, natural fermentation. Light pigeage, so just a light stomping on top to wet the cap, get extraction out. And I think the result is really lovely, elegant style of Pinot Noir that hopefully will break some boundaries and in terms of people's perceptions of English reds. And people say that England can't make good reds, and I've had some stellar stuff, not just from the hybrid varieties, but Pinot based. So the way it works is to explain to your listeners is that 3 barrels, they're stacked in like a triangle shape. The top one is effectively what we call as a free run. So it's what I pumped out directly from the barrels, of 4 barrels. And it's sort of like light in color. It has sort of a more fruit-driven nose of cherries and raspberries. and then the barrels are then first press and then second press on the bottom. So you have a collaboration of gentle extraction, a softer press, and then the hard press. We try to keep the things separate. Because it's such a small lot, it is easy to keep it separate. But ideally, we keep the pressing separate from what you refer to as a free run juice.
Sweet. Okay, do you want to say something about this while we've still got some left in our glass?
Yeah.
We're still by the fire.
Yeah, we're by our artificial fire, warming up in 6-degree winery conditions, and our hands are slowly getting frostbitten. That says, we do have wine that is warming up, and our hands are slowly defrosting. Right, Pinot, as I mentioned, 20% whole bunch, gives it that underlying complexity of sappiness, spicy notes. Again, this is the fermentation never got super hot, so we didn't get an over extraction of tannin, which was purposely implemented as a means of just gentle extraction. The way the wine actually is now, so we had the free run, effectively quote unquote free run. This is now the medium press, so the first squish of the fermented grapes coming out into the press tray. It tends to be a little more structure behind it. You get a little more savory notes, some more meatiness behind it. And you tend to get also some more like sour cherry element and more sort of violet aromas as well. So it's less of that sort of vibrant red cherry, black cherry, red currant sort of thing that we had from the free run, but now we're kind of into more of this savory tones, which I think, again, you have these different elements for a reason. So when you blend everything together, you have what would be a layered wine and complex wine, and something that is going to be enjoyable from start to finish. And for me, the Pinot isn't necessarily exactly how I want it to come out. I would maybe prefer to have a little more extraction on it, because it is quite light, but I wouldn't say it's super, super light. It has almost like a Cru Gamay feel about it. If you're familiar with Cru Gamay, it's not your confected Beaujolais Nouveau. It's one of those more serious wines. In Beaujolais, they make wines that have long legs for aging, wines that have depth and complexity and spicy notes, and not just ripe, lush fruit and vibrancy. But that being said, this wine does have vibrancy. But again, it's a fun wine. It's one of which I think is going to be great with a sort of tasting menu, a seasonal tasting menu, sort of in the autumn. And we're meant to release this in September. We'll see what happens with it. But for a first time out, I'm relatively pleased with it. We've had the first 2 barrels, now we're in the final 3rd barrel. It's the hard press or the final press. Again, you tend to have more robustness in the wine and more austerity, not in like a bad way, but it gives you more of that the structure, that's more masculinity, if you will. And you get more of the stemmy notes, I think, from it as well. And it also tends to be a darker, deeper color. Grapes are innately white inside, and the skins have the color to it. So that's why you have rosé, and that's why I have red wine from those the anthocyanins and the skin compounds. So it's fine. So you get these more savory notes. You're chomping at the bit. It's a little more not chomping at the bit as in wants more, but maybe. But as in the tannin is a lot more prevalent. So it's, again, that's why you put it in barrel. That's why you put it in old barrel. It's for the oxygen to soften. So the oxygen polymerizes all the compounds and the tannins, and you end up with a softer wine. So that's why people end up putting it in barrel a little bit longer. And again, there's no new oak in this. 228 liter barrels. I think, like I said, I think it'd be right. We will have 900 bottles of this. So it's really small production, and yeah.
We'll just say that. Yeah, it's nice way of putting it. Chomping at the bit in both senses of the word, because that final one, that one with the more structure, is my favourite of the three. I just think, as we've gone through the evolution of those three barrels, they're almost like three siblings for me. There's like the younger one, the middle one, the older one, and the last one is for me obviously closest to a finished wine, I think, and right to my taste, and I'm pleasantly surprised at the structure, and I think intensity as well, I would say, that you've gotten here from English Pinot.
So what we've done now is I've done a little on-the-spot blending for Lawrence here, and to give him an overview of potentially what the final product is gonna end up being like. Because as he mentioned, all the wines have their own personalities, whether they be as a blend or individual barrels. They all have their own individual personalities, and that's effectively our viewpoint. And it's also one that reflects the vineyard they come from too. We're trying to achieve single vineyard wines here, not because we want to be single vineyard, but I think the wines deserve to be single vineyard. That sounds a little bit twatty, but it is what it is. But yeah, so anyway, so we have this as a final blend, 3 barrels all together, with the different elements being put together like a puzzle piece. And we'll figure out what it tastes like. I haven't tasted this in a while myself, so. So on the nose, you get some of those inherent sort of stemmy characters, right? Under snappiness, a little bit of spiciness, you have a bit of volatility getting lift to the fruits. You get the sour cherry, you get the little bit of raspberry, you get the violet. You get maybe a little bit of red currant as well.
Yeah, I was just saying to you kind of off mic just there, I think that this is something that I've not seen on the podcast before and we've not brought out, which is that evolution really of showing the separation in the barrels and then bringing them together at the end. And having previously said the hard press was my favourite, I've actually got to say now the blend is my favourite, because it then just totally makes more sense. It brings all those different elements that you're looking to bring out, and the flavour is just, for me, just much more enjoyable then, because you've got those lighter, there's more playful notes coming in from the first press, and you've got all of that structure now and greater complexity. Really, really nice Pinot, and lovely colour as well.
So the future of Blackbook Winery is that we want to continue to support English wine. We want to continue to be continue to try to source the best fruit, which isn't the easiest. It's a highly competitive market. Grapes are expensive, and there's not enough going around. So it's as a new business, as an independent business, that works to our advantage, but sometimes it doesn't. So what we've done is we've done about 6,000 bottles this year, as I mentioned, with the intention of increasing production this year. We've brought on one new grower, and it looks like we'll have another grower, so we'll work with 4 growers altogether, increasing our capacity and trying to continue to put English wine on the map. In terms of where we sit in price point, I'm a firm believer of making wines accessible. But of course, you have to look within constraints of what your overheads are, and what is going to be financially feasible. So for us, we've managed to keep our still wines under £20. So the rosé will be about $18.50, and the Pinot Noir and the Chardonnay will be about £18.50, £19, call it. So trying to keep under that £20 mark. which I think is really important, not only as a consumer but also as a winemaker. And the sparkling, the Sèvres Blanc, will be sourcing about 23, 24 pounds. So again, within the accessible range where people can look. And frankly, I think the quality for that price point is quite good. But, hopefully you can be the judge of that. Currently, because my background in hospitality and the Michelin world, I'm pretty far reached with contacts in restaurants and also retailers as well. So, but we will be selective in terms of who we sell to. Not because we're pretentious, but because we don't have enough wine to go around. I love to supply a bunch of people. But, I can say is we won't be in supermarkets. That's not our target route to market. Ideally, we will sell direct to consumer. I think as you've probably spoken to other people, that's the best way to make your margins and for us to ultimately keep our pricing down. So we have a mailing list on our website that you can sign up to. We just actually engaged a new design team to do our labels, our branding, and our website. So that's, at the moment, we just have a holding page, which is at blackbookwinery.com. Really, really easy. Yeah, hopefully you continue to spread the good words, and we'll hopefully welcome visitors here soon as well. At the moment, we don't really have anything to offer. So there's no point. We have some barrels, we have some tank, but ultimately, again, it's difficult because we don't have a lot. So we can't welcome tour groups in just yet to do a tasting at the end because nothing is there. We don't have anything readily available. Of course, long-term plans, we do want to open up to the public in a more sort of sociable manner. So adding some sort of hospitality element, if possible, and potentially collaborating with our neighbors as well to do maybe a little mini festival or something here. So, at this point we're still trying to get our footing. We're still trying to figure out what works. If we don't sell the wine, we can't progress anything else. So it's kind of the horse before the carriage type thing. But we certainly hope we'll continue through, and that's the aspirations, and we plan on sort of continuing to grow and to bring experimental wines every year, do one-off wines, and if they work, then we can keep them on the roster. If they don't work, then we've done it once and we've had fun with it, and then we move on from there and we try new wines. So that's a plan. We'll have our staple wines, which will always be the Pinot Noir and Chardonnay and the Rosé. The Sèvres was initially experimental batch, but now it seems like we've renewed the contract with the grower, and he's really excited to continue to work with us. So that looks like it'll be on the roster, at least for another year. And just continue to have fun and to continue to get people aware of what we're doing and to understand that English wine is a serious wine, and still wine, can be made here and can be made really well. And, we're not just sparkling, which is what people are really understanding of English wine. So check us out.
Thank you so much to Sergio. As I said at the start, I think you're an absolute natural, and it was really great listening back to the interview and reliving all of the technical detail that you were happy to share for us. I hope it's also been great for you to listen back to this special moment in time and to hear your thoughts from back then about where you saw the winery heading. While many of the wines that we tried on the day are sold out on the Blackbook website, do please check them out for an up-to-date list of what's available. You can find their website and, of course, main social media handle below. And, of course, I would love to have you following along with me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, at Wine Podcast on Twitter, and email hello@interpretingwine.com. It's only left for me to say a huge thank you to all of my guests in this very special Lost episode series. Thank you for your patience. And if you've enjoyed this series, I'd be super grateful if you could drop a review on iTunes. as this will help the series and the podcast get heard by many more people. See you next time.